Imagine stepping into a car at midnight, clutching a wallet you think will save your husband from a ruined trip, only to realize, moments later, that the real danger isn't outside the vehicle, it's woven into the very life you've been living. What would you do if the man you trusted most, the friend you loved like a sister, and the life you thought was safe all shattered in a single heartbeat? One locked door. One trembling driver whispering, "Don't get out here. Trust me." And then, blue and red lights slicing through the darkness as police close in. But the scariest part isn't the sirens. It's discovering that you were never unsafe by accident. You were unsafe by design. This is the story of a woman who walked straight into a trap and then learned how to dismantle it piece by piece. A story where betrayal becomes fuel, danger becomes clarity, and one silent midnight ride becomes the moment a quiet wife transforms into a strategist. The night began in that quiet, delicate way only midnight can create, when the world feels half asleep and every sound echoes a little deeper than it should. Zire was standing alone in the dimly lit living room, the clock blinking 12:15 a.m., a cold silence hanging over the house like a heavy curtain. She had spent the last hour cleaning up the mess her husband, Draymond, had left behind while rushing to pack for what he'd called an urgent business trip. Papers scattered, drawers half open, a tie thrown across the desk chair, normal signs of a man in a hurry, yet something about the disorder felt off. Still, Zire had done what she always did. Helped him gather his things, kissed him goodbye and trusted him completely. That trust had become almost instinctive over the 3 years they'd been married. He'd always been gentle, always affectionate, always the husband women prayed for. So, when she spotted something unexpected, a familiar black leather wallet peeking from beneath a stack of folders, her first reaction wasn't suspicion. It was panic on his behalf. His ID cards, cash, all still inside. No man traveling across states forgets his wallet. No man preparing for an early flight leaves behind the one thing he needs to pass through airport security. Yet instead of questioning his story, her mind filled with worry for him. She pictured him arriving at the airport, patting his pockets, realizing too late what he'd forgotten. She imagined him stranded, frustrated, possibly missing his flight. The guilt hit her like a spark. Without hesitation, she grabbed the wallet, threw on her coat, wrapped her hijab tightly against the cold night air, and ordered a rideshare. It would be a simple, dutiful errand, she thought. Just a quick trip to save her husband from inconvenience. But some nights bend fate in ways you can't see until you're already in the middle of them. And this night was the beginning of a fracture she never imagined. The moment the black sedan rolled up to the gate, something inside Zire tightened, although she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the eerie quiet of the street, or the way the car's headlights cut through the darkness like two narrow blades. She slipped into the back seat with a polite greeting, expecting small talk, a soft radio hum, maybe the typical airport questions drivers ask. Instead, she was met with silence so thick it almost hummed. Booker, the name she'd seen on the app, kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't rude. He was focused, almost too focused, glancing at the mirrors with a frequency that made her fingers twitch around the wallet. The drive should have soothed her nerves. The highway was calm, the city fading into sleeping shadows, streetlights passing over her face in warm orange pulses. She tried calling Draymond multiple times, but every ring bled into nothing. No answer, no read receipt on her message about bringing the wallet. Strange, but she rationalized it. Maybe he was already inside the terminal. Maybe he turned off his phone. Maybe anything. What she couldn't rationalize was Booker. He changed lanes even when there was no traffic, slowed down near dark stretches of the road, then sped up like he was trying to outrun something she couldn't see. Each shift in his behavior sent tiny shocks of unease through her. And yet, she forced herself to be polite, to remain calm, repeating quiet prayers under her breath. The fear of being a woman alone in a car at night began to take shape in her chest, but she refused to let herself panic over a stranger's odd driving habits. She focused on the airport lights glowing ahead instead. She'd deliver the wallet, hug Draymond, laugh about the chaos, and everything would return to normal. But as the sedan pulled deeper into the airport zone, farther than rides usually went, into a darker, emptier corner, her breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. Deeply, unmistakably wrong. When the car finally stopped beside a concrete column, the world around them felt unnervingly still. No passengers. No staff, no moving vehicles. Just cold wind sweeping across an abandoned stretch of pavement. Instinct pressed Zire forward. She reached for the door handle, pulling with a burst of adrenaline, but it didn't budge. She pulled again harder, still locked. Panic erupted through her veins like fire. Why won't it open? She gasped, banging the window with trembling fists. Booker didn't turn, didn't flinch. His hands stayed frozen on the steering wheel, knuckles white, breath shallow. When he finally spoke, his voice was nothing like before, lower, urgent, almost pleading. "Don't get out here," he whispered. "Trust me." She stared at him in terror, unable to process the meaning behind his words. Who locks someone in a car and says, "Trust me"? Her chest tightened. Was this a kidnapping? A robbery? A horror she had walked straight into. Tears blurred her vision as she begged him to unlock the doors, offering money, jewelry, anything. But he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the sidewalk, on the shadows just beyond the column, as if watching for something. Or someone. 5 minutes, he said, voice shaking. Just wait 5 minutes. Your life depends on it. It was such a strange, impossible sentence that Zire felt reality tilt. Her breath turned shallow. Every muscle in her body trembled as the seconds crawled forward in agonizing slowness. She stared at the digital clock on the dashboard, watching numbers shift with painful reluctance. 1 minute. 2, 3, 4. Each second stretched into eternity. She braced for the worst, Booker attacking her. Someone dragging her out of the car, the kind of nightmare women whisper about, but pray never to experience. Yet what happened next shattered every expectation she had. On the 5th minute, exactly as Booker had warned, chaos exploded. Police cruisers screamed into the deserted drop-off zone from both directions, lights flashing, engines roaring, forming a barricade around the area so quickly it felt choreographed. Zire's scream died in her throat as armed officers sprinted past the sedan, rifles raised, shouting commands. But they weren't aiming at Booker. They weren't even looking at the car. They were running toward the very spot where she had attempted to get out, toward a figure lurking just beyond the shadows. What followed felt unreal. Officers tackling a man in a dark coat, a knife skittering across the ground, a chemical-soaked cloth lifting into the air in an evidence bag. Even through the car window, the sting of chloroform reached her. Chloroform. The kind used to subdue victims, kidnap victims, women like her. If she had stepped out when she reached for the handle, she wouldn't have survived the night. When Booker finally unlocked the doors, Zire stumbled out of the car shaking uncontrollably. In minutes, her world had gone from dutiful wife on an innocent errand to the almost victim of a premeditated kidnapping. And as the officers escorted Booker with respect, calling him by name, speaking to him as if he were an ally, one truth began to surface. This night wasn't random at all. Someone had planned for her to walk right into danger, someone close. Someone who knew exactly where she would be, when she would arrive, and how vulnerable she would be. She just didn't know yet that this someone was standing inside the airport at that very moment, watching the failed plan unravel. The moment the police subdued the man hiding in the shadows, Zire felt the ground tilt beneath her, like her entire life had shifted half an inch off its axis, and might never settle again. She stood near the open car door, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the frame just to stay upright. Blue and red lights pulsed across her face, painting her expression in sharp, shifting colors: fear, confusion, disbelief. Everything around her moved with brutal clarity. Officers shouting, radios crackling, evidence bags being sealed, a knife glinting under the overhead lights, and that chemical-soaked handkerchief, the thing that made her stomach twist, because she understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been waiting for her specifically. Someone who knew she would arrive alone. The realization didn't fully sink in until an officer walked past holding a document clipboard and muttered into his radio, "Target secured, ambush thwarted, target." That word echoed in her mind like a bell toll. She swallowed hard, the taste of metal thick on her tongue, because she was beginning to understand the terrible truth. She hadn't accidentally avoided danger. She had been seconds away from being dragged into a nightmare no one would have witnessed. And the only reason she was still standing was because a stranger who suddenly didn't feel like a stranger at all had locked the doors. When Booker walked around to her side of the car, there was something different in his eyes, no longer cold professionalism, but a heavy, almost paternal sorrow. He didn't speak immediately. He waited for her breathing to slow, for the panic to stop rattling her chest. An officer approached him with a respectful nod, speaking in a tone reserved for colleagues, not rideshare drivers. Their exchange felt coded, practiced, familiar. And that familiarity made Zire take a hesitant step back. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Booker exhaled, a long breath carrying years of memory she didn't know he had. "My name is Booker Langston," he said softly. "I wasn't assigned by the rideshare app tonight. I was assigned by your father. Years ago." The world seemed to still. Booker explained that he had been her father's head of personal security for decades until retirement. But before passing, her father had privately begged him to keep an eye on Zire from afar, not publicly. Not formally. Quietly. Secretly. Because her father had feared something he never voiced. That the people drawn to Zire's wealth might one day stop pretending. For years, Booker had watched over her life from a distance, only stepping in when something felt wrong. And tonight, he said, as he received intelligence that a kidnapping attempt was unfolding at the exact location her app indicated, nothing about her husband's forgotten wallet and sudden midnight flight made sense. So he took the call, he took the drive. And he made a decision she didn't understand until now. He locked the doors to keep her alive. The explanation hit Zire harder than the flashing lights or the near kidnapping itself. Her father, gone for years, had still been protecting her from the grave. And Booker had stepped out of retirement because something in her life had set off alarms he recognized from a past full of danger. But as Booker guided her closer to the edge of the terminal, pointing up at the second-floor windows, her heart rumbled. There, behind the glass, framed by the bright interior lights, stood Draymond, her husband. Not panicked, not searching, not relieved to see she was safe. No. His expression was twisted with rage and disbelief. He slammed his phone onto the floor hard enough for the sound to echo down the corridor. Beside him, wrapped around his arm with a familiarity that stabbed Zire deeper than any knife, stood Kenyatta, her best friend. The friend she trusted with secrets. The friend she shopped with, laughed with, leaned on. Kenyatta's arm rested gently on Draymond's waist, as if it belonged there. 2 suitcases stood at their feet, large, expensive, not the kind for business trips. As Zire watched from the shadows below, Draymond leaned into Kenyatta, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing with frustration. They weren't looking for her. They weren't worried. They were furious because their plan had just gone wrong. The truth landed like a physical blow. The kidnapping hadn't been a random attack. It had been hers, planned, expected, timed, and orchestrated by the 2 people she loved most. The revelation stole every breath from her lungs. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers quietly, ripping you apart in absolute silence. As the police continued their work around her, Zire felt her heart breaking in slow motion. Images flooded her. Draymond smiling at her before leaving, Kenyatta texting her cheerful messages, the last 3 years of trust and warmth. All of it collapsing like a sandcastle meeting the tide. Booker approached gently, as if sensing the storm inside her. He told her there was much more that she needed to see. Evidence had already begun to surface. Patterns, documents, movements her husband had hidden. And as the truth unraveled, Booker assured her she was no longer alone in this nightmare. But Zire barely heard him. Her eyes stayed locked on the window above where Draymond and Kenyatta stood, unaware that the woman they had attempted to discard was staring back at them from the shadows. The man she trusted had tried to have her kidnapped. The friend she adored had been in on it. And in the span of just 5 minutes, a single choice to stay inside a locked car, her life had split cleanly into 2 parts. The life she thought she had, and the one she now realized she must fight to reclaim. For most of her marriage, Zire believed she understood Draymond, his habits, his temperaments, the rhythms of his life. He was the man who kissed her forehead every morning, who praised her cooking, who spoke softly when she felt overwhelmed. And yet, as Booker escorted her away from the airport chaos toward the quiet safety of his car, she felt something inside her unraveling. Every memory of Draymond now replayed in reverse, each gesture peeling back its layers to reveal new, darker meanings. The rushed goodbye before his business trip, the wallet forgotten on the desk, the unanswered calls, the sudden urgency that had felt strange but harmless at the time. Booker waited until she steadied her breathing before speaking, his voice low and steady, as though preparing her for a truth she wasn't ready to hear. He revealed that the kidnapping attempt wasn't an isolated event, it was the final step in a plan months in the making. Her father, before passing, had confided in Booker that he feared one day someone might love Zire for her wealth more than her heart. He trusted easily, Booker said, but he also knew deception when it was staring right at him. And though the words were meant to comfort, they only deepened the ache in her chest. It meant her father had sensed something she hadn't. Draymond, the man she thought incapable of cruelty, had been weaving a web around her long before she ever realized she was trapped in it. As the sedan pulled onto the silent highway, Booker unfolded the story piece by piece, each detail like a shard of glass cutting deeper. 6 months earlier, he said, strange activity surrounding Draymond had caught his attention. Late-night meetings, suspicious transactions, visits to certain neighborhoods known more for underground gambling than legitimate business. Through his old contacts in law enforcement and private security, he learned that Draymond had accumulated massive gambling debts over $200,000 owed to a ruthless loan shark ring. Debts that didn't disappear with apologies, debts that cost lives when unpaid. To sustain the illusion of a stable life, Draymond had begun quietly selling small properties from Zire's inheritance portfolio, forging documents, and draining joint funds while claiming business setbacks. Zire felt sick as she recalled every time he had come home tense, complaining about market unpredictability or client delays, stories she had absorbed with supportive nods. She had believed him because love had made her blind, and trust had made her vulnerable. Booker explained that once Draymond realized he couldn't hide the missing money forever and that the men he owed were tightening their grip, he had shifted to a more desperate solution. A life insurance policy in her name. A forged power of attorney transferring assets. Tickets booked under his and Kenyatta's names. Each step meticulously planned to ensure her disappearance didn't merely free him from debt, it would make him rich. When Booker handed her the folded documents, he had collected photocopies of the insurance policy, screenshots of calls, the forged deeds. Zire's hands trembled as though holding radioactive truth. She recognized her supposed signature on the transfer papers, a nearly perfect imitation that made her skin crawl. She remembered the night he'd asked her to sign routine documents while she was half asleep on the sofa. The way he'd distracted her with kisses and jokes as he slid papers across the table. The memory burned now, tainted forever. Booker's voice softened as he told her he hadn't revealed everything earlier because the police operation was racing against time. The moment Booker learned where the kidnapping was meant to take place, the airport drop-off zone, he coordinated with officers to intercept the hitman before she ever stepped onto the pavement. Hearing the word hitman made her stomach seize. The chloroform-soaked handkerchief flashed in her mind again, a silent symbol of what could have been her final 5 minutes of consciousness. But Booker wasn't done. He explained that the man arrested had connections to the same criminal network Draymond owed money to. They had struck a bargain with him. Eliminate Zire so Draymond could collect her insurance payout, then repay them with interest. The betrayal wasn't simply emotional, it was contractual, calculated, and cold. Draymond hadn't merely given up on loving her. He had invested in her death. It was then, somewhere between the airport and the dark road leading home, that something inside Zire shifted permanently. Her tears dried, her fears settled. What rose from the shards of her heart wasn't hysteria, it was clarity. A clarity sharper than anger, steadier than grief. She looked into the rearview mirror and barely recognized herself. Gone was the soft, trusting woman who believed her marriage was safe. In her place was someone new, a woman sculpted by betrayal, steadied by truth, and anchored by the strength her father had always said lived quietly inside her. Booker watched the transformation unfold in silence, nodding with quiet respect. He told her she now held a rare advantage. Draymond did not know she had discovered anything. In his mind, the plan had simply failed due to a police operation, not because she had survived long enough to uncover the truth. Use his ignorance, Booker advised, his voice firm but gentle. You must go home. You must pretend nothing happened. Let him walk into your performance. Let him reveal himself. The words settled into her like armor. She realized that revenge wasn't always fire, it could be ice, calm, patient, strategic. And so, as the car turned into her quiet gated community and the house she once saw as a sanctuary came into view, she made a silent promise to herself and to the father who still protected her in spirit. She would not flee. She would not break. She would become the storm Draymond never saw coming. The house looked exactly the same as when Zire had left it, quiet, orderly, familiar, but stepping inside now felt like walking into the scene of a crime. Not because anything had physically changed, but because she had. The woman who closed the door behind her was no longer the tender, unquestioning wife who had rushed out into the night clutching Draymond's wallet. She moved through the living room with a deliberate calm, each footstep measured, each breath controlled. Booker's words echoed inside her. Use his ignorance. Let him reveal himself. But to do that, she had to erase every sign of the storm she had just survived. She washed her tear-stained face, fixed her hijab, practiced her soft smile in the mirror, until her expression matched the gentle familiarity Draymond knew so well. Then she staged the living room carefully, the wallet half tucked between sofa cushions, a magazine laid open on her lap, the TV muted and glowing faintly. She sat down and forced her body into a relaxed position, leaning back as though she simply dozed off while waiting for him to call. It was an illusion built with precision, one that needed to withstand the scrutiny of a man who had already proven how far he'd go to deceive her. When the clock neared 3 a.m. and the distant crunch of tires approached the driveway, she let her eyes drift shut, steadying her heartbeat. She wasn't pretending to be asleep for safety. She was pretending for strategy. The door flung open with a force that made the hinges rattle. Draymond's voice echoed through the house, loud, frantic, shaking with a desperation she now recognized not as concern but frustration. Zire! Zire! She responded perfectly, jerking awake, blinking in disorientation, her voice trembling just enough to seem natural. Dre, you're home. What happened? Weren't you supposed to be on your flight? For a moment, she saw complete confusion wash over his face, his eyes darting around the room, his mind scrambling to fill gaps in a story he hadn't rehearsed. Then came the performance. He dropped his shoulders, exhaled dramatically, and launched into a tale of losing his wallet on the way to the airport, turning back, getting stuck in traffic. His lies rolled out with that same honey softness he'd used so many times before, but now she could hear the cracks beneath them, the strain, the panic, the urgency of a cornered man. When she guided him to the sofa and pointed out the wallet peeking from the cushions, he froze. Relief mingled with disbelief in his face as he snatched it up and checked its contents. Everything intact, nothing missing. Exactly as he'd planned it to be before she was supposed to disappear from his life. He embraced her then, squeezing her tightly, whispering how lucky he was that she'd found it. And Zire forced herself not to pull away from the sickening scent of Kenyatta's perfume lingering on his clothes. She smiled warmly. She told him she was just glad he was safe. He believed every word. Because she was giving him exactly the version of herself he expected to see. She followed him up to the bedroom with quiet, dutiful steps, listening to him ramble about rescheduling flights, about work emergencies, about anything that might distract from the unraveling plan he was trying so desperately to salvage. As he showered, steam fogging the bathroom glass, Zire slipped into the room with Booker's voice recorder hidden in her palm, a tiny device no larger than a coin. Her gaze drifted across the objects Draymond used every day, his watchbox, his suit rack, his leather briefcase. The briefcase caught her attention immediately. It was the one thing he never left behind, the one item that followed him to work, to meetings, to trips, even to private conversations. Perfect. She opened the inner pocket, pressed the device deep into the corner, and slid the zipper shut just as the shower water stopped. When Draymond emerged wearing only a towel, she smiled gently, handing him a neatly folded set of clothes as though nothing in the world was amiss. He kissed her forehead, soft, habitual, practiced. The tenderness that once made her melt now made her skin crawl. That night, they lay beneath the same blankets, but the distance between them felt like an ocean. Draymond drifted into a heavy sleep, confident he'd regained control. But across the room, Zire lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, earphones in place, listening through the microphone app for any sign that he might slip. She didn't have to wait long. Just before dawn, as the faintest light touched the curtains, the microphone crackled. Footsteps, the sound of a zipper, a quiet click. Then Draymond's voice, sharp, irritable, almost feral. "Pick up the damn phone," he snapped. On the other end, Kenyatta's groggy whisper answered, laced with panic. Their conversation spilled out with ruthless clarity. They weren't lovers in distress. They were co-conspirators scrambling to salvage a sinking plan. Draymond cursed the failed kidnapping, terrified of the loan sharks who were already threatening him. Kenyatta told him he needed to press Zire harder, manipulate her, make her vulnerable. They talked about an old warehouse rumored to hold valuables left by Zire's father, and how retrieving the safe's combination might be their only chance at survival. Listening in the quiet kitchen, clutching her phone with steady hands, Zire felt no tears. Only confirmation, only clarity. When the call ended, she didn't walk upstairs to confront him. She didn't scream or break or fall apart. She simply dialed Booker. Half an hour later, his sedan pulled quietly in front of her house. As she stepped into the car with her documents and her resolve, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The days of playing the obedient wife were over. From this moment forward, she wasn't merely surviving Draymond's secrets, she was dismantling them. By the time Booker drove her back home from the bank and the attorney's office, Zire felt a strange calm settling over her. Not peace, nothing in her life resembled peace anymore, but a sense of control she had never known she possessed. Her accounts were secure, the joint cards frozen, her assets protected. The woman who walked into her home that afternoon was no longer prey. She was preparation incarnate. She spent the next hours cleaning, organizing, and grounding herself in routine, as if building a psychological fortress. So when Draymond returned, earlier than usual, carrying a bouquet of roses and wearing that well-practiced tender smile, she was ready. His theatrics would have fooled her just days ago. The dramatic sighs, the doting compliments, the soft insistence that he missed her terribly. But now she saw everything beneath the surface. The desperation hiding in the tightness of his jaw, the nervous tapping of his fingers, the way his eyes flicked subtly around the room as though assessing whether she suspected anything. When he presented her with a small pharmacy bag, saying he bought her imported vitamins because she looked pale lately, she almost laughed. He'd always played the part of a caring husband. Now he was weaponizing it. Inside the bottle, tucked under a neatly printed label, was a tampered seal, slightly wrinkled, slightly off-center, carefully glued. To someone else, it would have gone unnoticed. But tonight nothing escaped her. He watched her eagerly as she examined the bottle, his gaze sharp and unblinking, the gaze of a man waiting for his plan to advance one step further. At dinner, he hovered over her shoulder as she held the pill between her fingers, urging her gently, then insistently, to take it. His voice was warm. His eyes were wolfish. When she rose and walked to the kitchen for water, her pulse remained steady. She turned on the faucet, dropped the capsule into the sink, watched it dissolve into a grainy white smear, then slipped a mint from her pocket, a mint she tucked there hours earlier, anticipating exactly this moment. She returned to the table, lifted the mint to her lips, and swallowed it with deliberate ease. Draymond exhaled, satisfied, unaware that the only thing slipping past her throat was a calculated lie. But as she smiled at him, something inside her tightened. The realization that he was willing to poison her slowly rather than risk another public failure. That he would sit across from her at dinner, watching her die one capsule at a time, pretending to love her through every stage of the descent. The cruelty in that truth didn't break her, it minted her resolve. If he wanted a war of subtlety, she would beat him at his own game. Over the next 3 days, Draymond grew increasingly restless. Every morning he stood near her during breakfast, eyes scanning her for signs of weakness, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, anything he could interpret as progress. But instead of fading, Zire blossomed. She woke early to stretch under the sun, cooked meals rich with color and strength, and hummed softly around the house while he watched her from behind his coffee cup with mounting confusion. The bottle of vitamins emptied steadily, but only into the toilet, one capsule at a time. She never showed even the slightest symptom. And the more she flourished, the more he faltered. His creditors grew bolder, sending messages filled with threats. His hands shook when he thought she wasn't looking. His patience thinned, his lies tangled, his smiles strained. The pressure was collapsing his composure with terrifying speed. Meanwhile, Zire began the subtle work of psychological warfare. She offered reassurances when he spiraled. She touched his arm with tenderness when he acted distant. She played the role of a loving, supportive wife so flawlessly that he started second-guessing himself. Her poise became a mirror in which his unraveling mind saw only failure. She wasn't just deflecting his poison. She was poisoning his confidence. Then came the moment she knew would push him further toward exposing himself. Mid-morning, she called him at work with a cheerful voice, suggesting they host a small dinner at home that week, just the two of them and Kenyatta. She missed her friend, she said. She wanted to reconnect. On the other end of the line, Draymond went silent. It was the kind of silence that reveals much more than words. Fear, calculation, the rapid turning of gears inside a guilty man. After a long pause, he agreed. Too quickly, too reluctantly. And that told her everything she needed. By inviting Kenyatta into their home, she wasn't just cornering the woman who had betrayed her, she was cornering them together. She was forcing their alliance into the open, making them sweat under the same roof, forcing them to wonder just how much she knew. That dinner would be more than a meal. It would be a chessboard, and she was no longer a pawn. She was the player. As she hung up the phone, her eyes drifted to the empty vitamin bottle on the counter. She picked it up, rolled it between her fingers, and whispered under her breath, not with fear, but with the icy resolve of a woman reborn. Your poison won't touch me. But mine will destroy you. The evening air was unnervingly still as Zire prepared the dining room, arranging each detail with a level of precision that masked the storm inside her. She laid out the fine china, polished the silverware until it gleamed, and lit candles that filled the room with a soft golden glow. Anyone walking in would have thought she was planning a romantic evening, not setting the stage for psychological warfare. She deliberately chose her outfit. A modest burgundy dress, elegant but understated, a quiet contrast to the dramatic entrance she knew Kenyatta would make. The table, the lighting, the meal, Even the scents circulating through the room all projected warmth, comfort, and hospitality. It was an illusion designed to disarm, a scene crafted to lull two vipers into believing they still had control. But deep inside, beneath her steady hands and calm breaths, Zire felt a rising intensity, a conviction that tonight would be the turning point. Tonight, she would begin dismantling them from the inside out. When the doorbell finally rang at 8 o'clock sharp, she paused in the hallway, collected herself, and opened the door with a practiced smile. Kenyatta swept into the house like a gust of artificial charm, her tight dress clinging to her like a second skin, her perfume heavy in the air, her smile just a little too bright. She carried a gift bag and a rehearsed warmth, hugging Zire with the affection of a sister while hiding the malice of a traitor. Draymond trailed in behind her, his eyes flicking nervously between the two women. Guilt sat on his shoulders like a visible weight. Zire welcomed them both graciously, as if she hadn't seen Kenyatta clutching Draymond's arm at the airport, as if she hadn't heard their frantic whispers through the microphone during their secret call. She guided them to the beautifully set table, serving roasted meat, seasoned vegetables, and a bowl of rice scented lightly with saffron. The atmosphere was painfully polite at first, filled with awkward laughter and hollow compliments. Draymond and Kenyatta exchanged subtle glances, tiny, coded looks of reassurance and caution. They still believed they were in control of the game. That belief was the blade Zire would twist slowly, elegantly, without leaving a trace. Halfway through the meal, she struck. She put down her fork, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and spoke in a soft, thoughtful tone, as though sharing something delicate and deeply personal. "I had the strangest dream last night," she began. Draymond paused mid-bite. Kenyatta's hand jerked slightly, clinking her bracelet against her glass. Zire continued, her voice steady, almost soothing. "In the dream, there was a wealthy woman with a loving husband and a very close friend. But secretly, those two people were plotting to murder her. The details were so vivid, so precise it felt real." She described the fake business trip, the midnight rush, the hitman waiting in the shadows, the chloroform, the betrayal. Each detail landed like a hammer disguised as a whisper. Kenyatta's complexion drained of color. Draymond began coughing uncontrollably, water spilling down his chin as panic overtook him. Their reactions, raw, immediate, explosive, were better than any confession. After letting the silence thicken, Zire offered a small laugh. "Of course," she added lightly, "it was just a dream. I'm lucky to have a husband as loving as Draymond, and a friend as loyal as you." Her smile was gentle. Her eyes were knives. The room, once warm, now vibrated with tension so thick it felt like fog settling over their skin. Before her enemies could recover, she delivered the final blow. Still smiling, she said she'd been so shaken by the dream that she'd visited her attorney that very day and changed her will. She explained it calmly, almost sweetly. If she were to die suddenly before age 60, especially under suspicious circumstances, every penny she owned would automatically be donated to orphanages and cancer foundations. Not a single dollar would go to her husband, not a cent to any relatives, nothing to anyone who might benefit from her death. She framed it as spiritual enlightenment, as a desire to give generously, to ensure her life's work served a greater purpose. But to Draymond and Kenyatta, it was a guillotine dropping silently between them and their fantasies of wealth. Their faces collapsed into masks of horror and disbelief. The dream was dead. The inheritance was gone. Their reason to kill her had evaporated. As they sat there, two conspirators trapped in their own panic, Zire lifted her wine glass with a serene, unbothered smile. What they didn't know was that a hidden camera in the corner was recording every twitch of fear in their faces, every shift in their breathing, every glance that revealed far more than words. Tonight, she hadn't just shaken their foundation. She had begun to bury them in it. The morning after the dinner, the house felt unusually light, quiet, almost peaceful, but that peace existed for only one person, Zire. For Draymond, it was the beginning of his unraveling. He had barely slept. The revelation about the new will gnawed at him like acid, burning away any illusion of control he once believed he had. He paced the living room long before sunrise, pulling at his tie, muttering under his breath while pretending to prepare for work. His hands shook as he poured himself coffee. The cup rattled against the saucer. Every move he made radiated panic. The weight of his gambling debt loomed over him like a noose tightening with each passing minute. Without the possibility of inheriting Zire's wealth, the only thing waiting for him was destruction from the loan sharks, from bankruptcy, from exposure. When he walked out the door that morning, he didn't kiss Zire on the forehead, didn't tell her he loved her, didn't even look her in the eye. Instead, he slipped away with a stiffness that spoke volumes. She watched him leave, her expression neutral, but inside she felt the shift. He was done pretending to love her. Now he was a man cornered. And cornered men stopped thinking rationally. Draymond didn't go to the office that day. Instead, he drove across the city to a cramped, dimly lit apartment, the secret hideout he shared with Kenyatta. She was already there pacing in a panic, her makeup smeared from crying, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages from unknown numbers. The loan shark's men had grown impatient. They now threatened not just Draymond, but anyone associated with him. Kenyatta lashed out the moment he walked in, blaming him for everything: the failed kidnapping, the foiled poisoning, the disastrous dinner, the changed will. Her voice trembled with fear, not remorse. Draymond retaliated with equal venom. He blamed her for distracting him, for pushing him toward stupid decisions, for complicating a plan that was supposed to be simple: remove Zire, claim the wealth, escape the debt. Their partnership, once built on greed and lust, was disintegrating into raw survival instinct. But as the arguments escalated, so did the reality closing in on them. They had no more time. No more leverage, no more options. Unless they could force Zire to undo the changes she had made. Unless they could make her sign over everything not by deception, but by fear. That idea, dark, violent, desperate, took shape in Draymond's mind like a final lifeline. He decided they would orchestrate a staged kidnapping inside the house. This time, there would be no hired hitman waiting in shadows, no subtle poisons, no elaborate setups. Instead, he would bring the threat directly to her, raw, physical, undeniable. He contacted 3 criminals willing to do anything for money. They met in a dingy coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where deals were whispered over chipped mugs and no one asked questions. For the right price, the men agreed to break into the house, restrain Zire, and convince her through terror, pain, or force to sign documents reversing her will and transferring her assets. They didn't need her dead. They only needed her terrified enough to comply. Draymond gave them photos of the house layout, instructions on the security system, and told them exactly where Zire spent most evenings. Kenyatta, though trembling at the thought of violence, didn't object. She was too afraid of what failure meant. As dusk settled over the city, they piled into a van with tinted windows, driving toward the house with a sense of finality. This was their last attempt, their last gamble. If this failed, they had nowhere left to run. When they pulled up to the house, something was off. The porch lights were off, strange for Zire, who usually turned them on at sunset. The curtains were drawn, no movement inside. Her car still sat in the garage, but the house felt empty. Draymond unlocked the door with his spare key, motioning the thugs inside like a commander ordering soldiers into battle. They burst in, sweeping the room silently, efficiently. But the living room was empty, the kitchen unused, the bedroom untouched. Every closet, every corridor silent. Even the air felt still, as if holding its breath. Panic surged through Draymond as he raced upstairs, shouting her name. Nothing. When he stormed back down, chest heaving, a sudden chime echoed through the room. The laptop on the coffee table lit up with an incoming video call. He approached cautiously, dread tightening around his throat. The call connected automatically. And then, Zire's face appeared on the screen, calm, composed, illuminated by soft lighting in an unfamiliar room. She greeted Draymond. Then she greeted Kenyatta. Then she greeted the criminals he had brought with him, proving she knew exactly who stood in her home. A small live stream icon glowed in the corner of the screen, the viewer count rising steadily. In a voice cold enough to freeze bone, she explained that every camera in the house was recording, that the footage was being stored remotely, that one tap on her phone would send everything, including their faces, to the police. In that moment, Draymond realized the horrifying truth. The woman they had underestimated, manipulated, and tried to destroy had outplayed them again. And this time, there was no exit strategy. The tension in the living room thickened as Zire's image flickered on the laptop screen, her calmness contrasting violently with the panic that rippled through Draymond, Kenyatta, and the three hired thugs. Her voice was steady, icy, almost serene, an unsettling tone that made Draymond's stomach twist into knots. She explained, with gentle precision, that the cameras placed around the house were streaming in real time to a private server. Every movement, every face, every intention was documented. The men behind Draymond shifted uneasily, glancing toward the windows and exits, suddenly unsure whether to stay or flee. But before they could react, Zire continued. She wasn't calling the police, not yet. She wanted to speak to them first. That alone unnerved them more than any threat. Calm enemies are far more dangerous than loud ones. She revealed that she knew exactly why they had come, exactly what they intended, and exactly how desperate Draymond's situation had become. Then, like bait dropped into water, she mentioned the one thing she knew would anchor their attention: hidden wealth. A cache her father had supposedly left behind, enough to cover every debt. Enough for them all to disappear forever. The moment the word gold escaped her lips, Draymond's eyes gleamed with a mixture of greed and hope, the kind only a drowning man feels when he spots land, even if the land is an illusion. Zire fed them the story with meticulous elegance. An old textile warehouse her father once owned in the industrial outskirts of the city, a buried safe beneath machine number 7. A secret compartment holding cash and gold bars untouched for years, and a combination. She recited it easily, numbers tied to their anniversary reversed. It was a trap so brilliant, so delicately layered, that Draymond never realized he had walked into it the moment he leaned closer to the screen. Kenyatta clung to his arm, whispering frantically, her voice trembling between doubt and desperation. She remembered the warehouse. She remembered rumors of treasures Zire's father had hidden before his passing. Draymond latched onto that memory, his greed overriding every shred of caution. "We get the safe, we leave the country, and we're done," he muttered to Kenyatta, ignoring the growing viewer count on the live stream. The criminals, too, perked up, men who cared little for loyalty but a great deal for profit. In their minds, a safe full of cash was infinitely more attractive than coercing signatures out of a woman protected by cameras and legal leverage. Zire watched their reactions with quiet satisfaction. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply told them she wouldn't interfere if they retrieved the safe, but if they harmed her or tried anything foolish, the stream would go public instantly. It was brilliant. She positioned herself as irrelevant to their escape, all while pulling every string. The van roared down the highway like a wounded beast, carrying inside it a collection of panic, greed, and unraveling sanity. Draymond sat in the front seat, clutching the directions as though they were a lifeline. Kenyatta stared out the window, her mascara streaking down her cheeks, whispering prayers she didn't believe in. The hired men exchanged excited glances, already imagining the weight of gold in their hands. None of them noticed the black sedan trailing them from a careful distance. Inside that car sat Booker and Zire, their expressions unwavering as they watched the red dot on the GPS tracker move steadily across the city map. The warehouse emerged in the desolate industrial district, like a wounded relic, its paint peeling, its fences rusted, its windows broken. A place long abandoned, long forgotten, except now weaponized by the woman they had tried to destroy. Draymond forced the van through the loose fencing, tires crunching over gravel, and the men spilled out with shovels, crowbars, and flashlights. The inside smelled of dust, old grease, and decay. Their footsteps echoed across the hollow space as the beam of the flashlight sliced through darkness. Machine number 7, a rust-covered husk of metal, loomed at the back of the warehouse, exactly where Zire had said it would be. Without hesitation, the thugs began smashing the concrete beneath it, sweat dripping down their temples as chips of cement flew in every direction. After nearly an hour of relentless digging, a metallic thud signaled they struck something solid. Hearts pounding, they cleared the remaining debris until the top of a metal safe appeared. Draymond fell to his knees, brushing dirt off the edges, his breath trembling with anticipation. He spun the combination lock, following Zire's instructions. The lock clicked open, and he lifted the lid with shaking hands, expecting gold, expecting salvation, expecting freedom. But what spilled out instead were papers, photos, receipts, evidence, copies of his gambling debts. Transfer documents showing money siphoned from Zire's accounts, photos of him and Kenyatta entering hotels, records of secret calls, and on top, a white envelope with Zire's handwriting, a gift for the traitors. Inside, a single sheet of paper read, "The treasure you seek is not here. What is here is the truth. The police are on their way." Before Draymond could even process the words, brilliant white floodlights burst through the warehouse windows. Sirens wailed outside. SWAT officers stormed through the doors, shouting commands, their rifles raised. The criminals bolted toward the back exit, but it swung open before they reached it, revealing heavily armored officers who tackled them to the ground. Draymond collapsed, screaming incoherently. Kenyatta sobbed hysterically. The warehouse, once a symbol of hidden wealth, had become their tomb. And as the chaos unfolded, the main door opened slowly. Officers stepped aside, and Zire walked in, poised, radiant, untouchable. The woman they tried to erase was now the witness to their downfall. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply stood in the doorway, watching justice unfold exactly as she had orchestrated. In the weeks that followed the warehouse raid, the world Zire had once shared with Draymond crumbled into dust. Not quietly, not gracefully, but loudly, like a collapsing building whose fractures had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. The police investigation intensified with frightening speed. Every lie he had whispered, every document he had forged, every call he thought no one would ever hear now stood tall as evidence. The detectives who handled her case were stunned by the magnitude of the betrayal, the meticulous planning, the financial exploitation, and the attempt on her life. Zire, however, felt oddly calm as she recounted the events. She spoke steadily, factually, as if describing someone else's story rather than her own. The prosecutors built a case so airtight that even Draymond's most expensive lawyer couldn't find cracks in it. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the scandal, whispers of a wealthy husband attempting to kill his wife for insurance money, an affair with her best friend, the involvement of criminal networks. But Zire's name never leaked. Booker made certain of that. She was protected now not only by the law but by the silent loyalty of people who respected her strength. That silence gave her space to breathe, to rebuild, and to examine her life without the shadow of a predator at her side. Draymond's fall was swift and merciless. The man who once wore tailored suits and moved through corporate offices with effortless charm was now reduced to an inmate in a maximum security prison. His arrogance evaporated the moment the cell door clanged shut behind him. At first, he tried to maintain the polished persona he'd spent years perfecting, speaking politely to guards, offering advice to other prisoners, pretending he still had influence. But prison walls strip illusions faster than any betrayal could. The loan sharks he had owed money to had connections everywhere, including behind bars. Whispers about him spread quickly, the debts, the failed kidnapping, the cowardice. He became a target, mocked by the same criminals he once tried to manipulate. His days filled with threats, extortion attempts, and beatings he could not report without risking worse. In the darkness of his cell, he often replayed the image of Zire standing in the warehouse doorway, the woman he thought he could break, the woman he thought he owned. Her stillness haunted him. Her intelligence terrified him. And in the suffocating silence of confinement, Draymond realized too late that he had never truly known her. He had only known the version of her he believed he could control. Kenyatta fared no better. The women's prison she entered held no sympathy for her story. When word spread that she had colluded in a plot to murder her best friend, she was met with an immediate and chilling hostility. Inmates stared at her with a mixture of disgust and contempt. The glamorous woman who once boasted about designer handbags and exclusive parties was now scrubbing floors, washing other people's clothes, begging for basic safety in exchange for cigarettes or commissary favors. Her mirror became her enemy, reflecting not beauty but consequence. Every night, she lay awake replaying each decision she made. The moment she flirted with Draymond behind her friend's back, the first lie she told to cover the affair, the first hint of greed that pushed her deeper into betrayal. She cried often, but tears did nothing to lighten the weight of her choices. In the dark corners of her mind, she imagined what life might have been if she had loved Zire as a friend instead of envying her. But regret was a currency that bought nothing in the world she now lived in. Her life, once built on vanity and manipulation, had become painfully, brutally real. While Draymond and Kenyatta spiraled into misery, Zire's world began to bloom with a new sense of clarity and purpose. She renovated her home, replacing furniture tainted by memories with warm, refreshing pieces. She stripped the walls of the past and repainted her spaces with lighter tones, soft creams, gentle golds, calming blues. Her house stopped feeling like the place where someone had tried to kill her. It began feeling like the place where she chose to live. She dove into her father's business, no longer as a distant overseer, but as a strong, competent leader. She identified the employees who had aided Draymond's secret financial movements and replaced them with people who valued transparency and loyalty. Her employees admired her, not because she was wealthy, but because she had survived something monstrous and turned her pain into discipline. She was invited to speak at business seminars, often asked how she had rebuilt her life after betrayal. She never named the offenders. She didn't need to. Her story was not about them, it was about her. And in every mirror she passed, she saw not the frightened woman who once sat trembling in a locked car, but the woman who orchestrated a masterpiece of justice. A woman emerging from ashes, not broken, but reborn. 6 months after the night that nearly ended her life, Zire found herself standing once again in the place where everything had unraveled, the airport. But this time, there was no fear pulsing through her veins, no icy dread twisting her stomach. Instead, she felt something rare, something she had almost forgotten she was capable of feeling: peace. She stood near the same concrete column where a hired killer had once waited for her, the same stretch of pavement where fate had intervened through Booker's warning and police intervention. The early afternoon sun bathed the terminal in a warm glow, softening the harsh edges of her memories. This place, once the setting of her darkest moment, had transformed into the gateway of her rebirth. She pulled her small travel suitcase behind her, her steps light, unhurried. Her burgundy passport was tucked neatly into her hand, and her heart fluttered with anticipation. Today wasn't about escape. It wasn't about fear. It was about choosing herself, her faith, her healing, her future. She was headed for Umrah, the pilgrimage she once dreamed of taking as a couple, now undertaking alone. Yet she felt more whole than she ever had beside Draymond. Before entering the terminal, she paused to take in the sight of Booker standing beside her, leaning against the black sedan that had once been her salvation. He looked older now, but in a dignified way, like a man who had fulfilled a promise he made long ago. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he had protected more than just a woman. He had protected the trust of a man he once served, a man whose memory still guided him. The bond between them had deepened, not romantic, but familial, built on respect and shared battle scars. Booker adjusted her suitcase strap and asked if she was ready. She smiled, the kind of smile that begins in the soul and works his way to the surface. "I'm ready," she said, and she meant it. She thanked him for everything, not just for saving her life, but for believing in her strength even before she recognized it in herself. Booker's eyes glistened with emotion. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her something her father had once said about her. "She doesn't break. She transforms." Hearing those words now, after all she had endured, felt like a blessing and a benediction wrapped into one. Inside the terminal, she moved through the familiar sounds of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and families reuniting. But today, those sounds didn't overwhelm her. They soothed her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel watched. She didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel overshadowed by betrayal. She felt free. When she approached the immigration counter, the officer looked over her passport, stamped it, and offered a cordial smile. And that simple thud of the scam felt symbolic, like a period closing a long, agonizing chapter. On the other side of the checkpoint, she took a moment to breathe deeply, letting gratitude flow through her. She thought about her father, whose protectiveness had saved her long after his death. She thought about Booker, whose loyalty had turned the tides of fate. She thought about the countless nights she lay awake wondering how her life had derailed so tragically and how, step by step, she reclaimed it. Even the betrayal of Draymond and Kenyatta no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a scar, permanent, yes, but healed, reminding her of her strength rather than her suffering. She realized something profound. Not every chapter ends cleanly, but every ending teaches something essential. As she waited near her gate, watching planes rise into the sky one after another, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. She was no longer the woman who trembled in a locked car, nor the wife who looked at her husband with blind trust. She was Zire, rebuilt, refined, redefined. A woman who had walked through betrayal and emerged with clarity. A daughter who honored her father's memory by choosing strength over fear. A survivor who turned danger into purpose. When her flight was called, she rose with a serene confidence and followed the stream of passengers. Each step toward the boarding bridge felt symbolic, a step away from the shadows of her past and toward a future she would write with her own hand. As she settled into her seat and fastened her belt, she glanced out the window one last time. The airport lights twinkled like distant stars against the horizon. And as the plane began to ascend, she felt the weight of her old life fall away like sand slipping through open fingers. Ahead of her lay Mecca, healing, clarity, and the dawn of a life she had earned with every moment of courage. This chapter of her story had come to its rightful end. But her new beginning, bright, unbroken, and entirely her own, was only just taking flight.